Hi, my name is Patrick Lager. I had this idea one day while having a beer that I wanted to do a series called Masters of Persimmon, a video series of the best persimmon club builders, restorers, and historians in the world. This is part one. I had the chance to spend a day with Brann in North Carolina, meet his family, and his horse Skipper. After nearly 60 years in the golf business, Nim just has one fascinating golf story after another. We all know the wonderful art that Nim produces, but let me tell you, he's an even more wonderful person. I hope you will enjoy hearing Nim's story as much as I do. Nim, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with me. It's such a pleasure to be here with you in your shop. I am so in awe of someone who can create such beautiful art as you do. Can you share with me how you became one of the best club builders in the world?
It all started when I was around 13 years old. And
So it wasn't that long ago then?
Yeah, I'm 71, so it's been a while. I'm from Danville, Virginia. And the club that I grew up with my dad, you know, he was on the board and got me playing at an early age. And we didn't have anybody in the town of Danville that did club work. And back in those days, you know, it was all persimmon woods. And so the pro, I think, at our club, the only thing he could do is put whipping on a club. So my daddy, the whole Brann side of the family were engineers. My granddaddy was a welder for the Southern Railroad line. My uncle, he was a sculptor, he's a gunsmith. So we have a whole line of engineered mind people that I grew up around, including my dad. So Daddy and I, we decided that this stuff is not rocket science. A golf club is only put together, it's only like 4 or 5 parts. So we figured out how to take one apart and put it back together. So we started doing our own club work, and then I took it to the next level. Daddy, he didn't care about it that much, but I did. And so there was a guy in Raleigh. He was a club maker in Raleigh, and he was at Hillendale Golf Course. And everybody used to call him Pick, was his name. So we started bringing stuff down to Pick, you know. And sometimes we'd get stuff back from him almost worse than we took it down. So that was a big inspiration for me and my dad, that we can do just as good as that, you know. So that's how it all started with me. So by the time I moved to Raleigh when I was in high school, my first year in high school, and by the time I got out of my senior year, I'm already repairing clubs and making money on the side for members at the club, at Raleigh Country Club. So I already had my feet wet in reshafting and refinishing and learning the art. So I got to know people as time goes on, got to know players, and you know, I was involved in golf from the competitive standpoint, so I knew kind of what a golf club's supposed to look like, because I'm playing competitive golf and it's not like going and buying a store brand club. So I knew what it took. And I told you the story earlier about Burr Patchel, and I got to know Mr. Patchel, and he was an antique collector, and he used to sell golf clubs for McGregor Golf back in the 20s and the 30s, back when all these classics, well, back then it was all hickory clubs. So there was a transition in the late 20s into the 30s where hickory clubs transitioned from hickory shafts to steel shafts. So Mr. Patchel, he was, like I said, he was a salesman for McGregor Golf, making his rounds to all the clubs. And so he told me the story that when it first started, that he'd go call on a club to the pro to sell McGregor Golf, and he saw a bunch of caddies that had a pile of clubs out by the caddy shack, and they were burning this pile of clubs because they were hickory shafted clubs, and they didn't no longer need hickory shafts. So, because the steel shafts are in. So, knowing Mr. Patchel like I do, he couldn't stand that. So, he made a deal with the caddies. He said, look, next time I come around to make a call for the pro, save the hickory golf clubs that you're going to burn. Save them. And I'll give you a little piece of money for them because I want to collect them. So that's where he ended up, Patrick, with that building full of, hickory shafted golf clubs, which is probably one of the largest collections ever has been, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, I know his son Ed sold all that stuff for $200,000. So I know that they got some money out of it, but it was amazing. But that's how it all began with Mr. Patchel. So when I met him, he had his museum, golf museum, and he had his antique furniture business, and he was selling store brand clubs. And anyhow, I got to know him pretty well, and so he started giving me a little work on the side to, some of his better hickory clubs to put in his museum. So that, I got that relationship started with him. And I did that pretty much all through high school. And I lost touch with him. I went off to college and got my job after college, and hadn't seen him in 4 or 5 years. So I stopped by to see him one day. I was working out in Brann Avenue, and so I stopped to see Mr. Patchel. And he had built on the back of his building, built a golf shop, and had all the machinery that I'd only read and seen about, but he had it in his shop. And I told him that day, I said, Mr. Patchel, I'm going to go out on a limb here. I'm going to go quit my job, and I'm going to come to work for you tomorrow. And he said, I can't do that. He said, I said, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it, Mr. Patchel. I said, I know how to make calls and sell. And I said, I'll generate the business to pay me. So that all worked out. And after a period of time, I set up a wholesale network of doing wholesale repair work for the pros. So they can make money, we can make money, and start that business. And so I was working with his son. His son got in trouble and he couldn't make it. So he ended up closing the shop. So during that period of time, I met a bunch of different pros, and I met a bunch of different people that were flipping golf clubs. They were buying classics at yard sales, pawn shops, places like that, bringing them to me, and I'm restoring them, and then they're flipping them and making money. So it was a pretty easy deal to figure it out, that it's all about money. Well, anyhow, one of the guys that I was doing it for, Marty Allen, he had just bought Wilmar Golf Course. It was a 9-hole course then, and he had built a back nine, built a new clubhouse, and he heard about what happened with the Patchels and me being out of a job. So he came to me and he offered me a position to be the pro at the club, and that meant working in a shop and doing typical pro stuff. I could teach, go out on the range and start a teaching program, and he said, oh, by the way, you can start your club business. I'll give you the old clubhouse, which was down by number 2's tee. It was number 1's tee. It was a par 3, but you can have that building for your club business. And so it was a win-win for me. I mean, he's given me a place to work. On top of that, he lent me the money to build my machines and buy my machines to do this work. So, I mean, I couldn't help but go into the golf business. I mean, it was destined, I guess you might say. So I worked with him for about 3 years. Then I started my own off-course shop from there on. And then that's when I started doing work for, I was on the road. I was on a main drag in Raleigh. Lots of people would come in, and my name got out there. And shortly after that, I started building persimmon woods from scratch and started with putting my name on them.
It was interesting, when you started out, you were talking about your dad, and you were talking about it as a science and engineering and so on.
Engineering, yeah.
Yeah. And
engineering.
then you switched over and you started talking about it as an art.
Yep.
And is this your expression of art?
It is. I've said this many times. My whole family is is very artsy. My mother's side of the family, they did art. They oils and pastels and charcoal, and they drew things. My daddy's side of the family were engineering type. My uncle, he was a gunsmith. He made guns from scratch. I mean, literally from scratch, every part. So he had a big machine shop. My granddaddy was with the Southern Railroad, so he worked in a machine shop, and that's back in the days when railroad engines were steam driven. So he was involved with welding and building steam driven locomotives. So, I came up with all that. And so I guess it was an art form. And then being a player, knowing how clubs should be, it just sprung out of that. So I figured I could make as good a golf club as anybody else. And that's what I did.
Looking back at your career, do you have any idea of how many clubs you have built or restored?
That's in the thousands. I mean, I saw one of the questions you asked, and I'm thinking, I don't know how to answer that one, but I mean, I did this for about 20 years, straight into business. So I was averaging 100 refinishes, restorations a week, along with, and I wasn't building clubs till about the last half of that. So about 10 years of that business, I was building my own line. And it still goes into the thousands. And I was doing a whole lot of, after exhibiting at the PGA show, I got to meet people from all over the world. I had customers in England, and I had customers in Australia, I had customers in Japan. And so I was doing some private label work. Like I remember Martin's Golf Shop was a big golf shop down in Myrtle Beach. So if you played golf at Myrtle Beach, you went to Martin's shop. So he was the guy in Myrtle Beach, and back in the Persimmon day, he had his own line of Persimmon. So I did a line for him. That was one of my private label lines.
Is there a club build or a restoration that is the most memorable to you? Do you have a special build that comes to mind?
Yeah, I do. I guess besides all the pros that I made stuff for, I played, made stuff for great amateurs and pros alike. I was doing Bob Tway's work there for a while. He was on the PGA Tour. He was a big name kind of guy, and I did a lot of his stuff. I had a celebrity, John Denver, the old John Denver, singer. I did some stuff for him. He'd order stuff from me. So those are just two people that I can remember off the top of my head. And then the latest thing that I did was for John Morgan, the British tour player, and he's kind of, him and John Hayes, they're reviving the Joe Powell line, and I did the prototypes for John Morgan. I made the first 5 Joe Powells for him. Now the one that people know about is Rory McIlroy hit that driver, Persimmon driver, at the Scottish Open. I built that club, so that's a memorable thing for me. That I mean, my name's not out there on that, but I was the one who built that golf club.
You have an incredible line of woods. It'd be interesting to know how do you start out? I mean, you source the persimmon, and if you can go through all the steps that you do until it becomes this incredible piece of art.
Well, I'll give it a shot. The Persimmon started out to be Louisville Golf was a big company. Elmore Justin, his brothers, they literally had a lumber process where they were getting trees, going through the drying process, and turning the rough heads to a rough point to where club makers like myself and others at the time, there was probably hundreds of club makers at the time buying stuff from Elmore Just and Jerry Childress at Middle Ground Golf. They were both sourcing the wood from the guys that are cutting the trees, and they're buying the trees from them, and it goes through a drying process and a sawing up process to get the wood to where they can put it in the lathes to rough it down.
You say a drying process. In time, are we talking weeks? Are we talking months?
No, well, they had several processes. They had an air drying process that would probably take days. They couldn't dry it too quick, because if they dried it too quick, it would crack. Okay, because wood has moisture in it, and has a certain percentage of moisture that they got to get it out of there without it cracking. And then they came out with an RF process, radio frequency, that they could RF a block, a rough block for turning. They could do that in hours. So I think after time, I know Elmore, they went to that more than likely, because instead of days or weeks, they could do a batch in hours, and you end up with the same process. The wood is dry, it has a very low percentage of moisture in the head, so that a guy like me that's going to machine that head down to a club, it's not much moisture, so the head can't swell up and contract and do all that. So, and I was lucky enough to meet these guys, when they were in business. I'm hoping to meet Jerry Childress. I met him a long time ago at the PGA show, and that's how I met him. But we're going on an RV trip next month, and I'm actually going to visit his place out in Kentucky. So I'm going to get to meet Jerry, and his son Mark is the one that's actually carrying that business forward. So hopefully, knock on wood, that Persimmon woods are still going to be, turned by his son. And hopefully, if the demand goes up, I'm going to be buying more. David Bass is going to be buying more. John Hayes is going to be buying more turnings. So I think that'll help keep him in business too. So, so your question was sourcing or choosing, right?
Well, so you get this piece of wood.
Yeah.
What do you do next?
Well, I actually wrote a little list up, just so you can actually see something. But I mean, obviously, the first thing I do is choose. I usually have a lot of heads to choose from.
Yeah.
And I even have customers I'll actually send them pictures of the actual rough turning itself, and let the customer say, okay, I like that one, or I don't like that one, or I like the grain on that one, and and they'll pick out what grain looks good to their eye. So that's normally how I start. So first process after that is what we call nose and neck cut. So anyhow, after I choose a head, like this one in particular, this is the LFF model.
Is that the most popular model, or?
It's one, with that and the 945 and 693. I mean, all your classic McGregors that you see, that's what people want. This particular model was turned by Middle Ground Golf, and it's got a 2-inch face. And this is how it's jacked into the turning lathe. So this turns in the lathe, and it's got a cutter head that starts here at the top. And as it's turning, this cutter head is revolutions, is high revolution. It cuts and it follows a master. The master turning, it follows that. And so it gets down to that. And it starts out to be at least twice that size. It's that big, that thick all the way around. So it starts out pretty thick. So there's a lot of waste, a lot of sawdust that comes off of one of these things.